Let's go. Thank you so much, Leia, for coming on the show. We're super excited that you reached out to us, and we can't wait to hear your story. So thank you for being here.
Thank you, Emma. And I just want to throw out a lot of gratitude to you, because when I reached out to you, I think I was in a pretty confused place, definitely uncharted territory. And you were just so thoughtful in your reply. And it was just really helpful for me in terms of better understanding the dynamics of the situation I was in. So thank you again for taking time to a total stranger to help them out.
Well, thank you. I'm glad.
Excuse me.
I was actually, the first email response was Finn.
That was me.
I have to give him credit.
I'm so sorry, Finn.
It's okay. It's a team sport.
We do. We tag team the email. So sometimes it's me and sometimes it's him.
Okay. So that was you. Okay. Interesting. Nice.
I just wanted the world to know that I have some wisdom. And I used every ounce of it into that email. But no, it was fantastic to hear sort of what you've been going through. And we're excited to take some of the things that you've learned over the last couple of weeks and months and
years
and
your life,
share them with the world. So do you mind telling everyone who is Leia?
Yeah. So let's see. I'm 39. I live in Chicago, and I'm actually a really big relationship junkie. So Emma and Finn didn't know this when I reached out, but I founded and I lead a relationship group on Facebook. We're about 12,000 members from across the globe. And it's my purpose. And it's it's really like my passion. It's my passion and my purpose. I spend a ton of my free time creating events and conversations for the group. We just had Esther Perel on, the famous therapist, and she has a podcast called Where Should We Begin? So even though I'm very new to polyamory, I bring, some knowledge of relational skills to it. Yeah. And outside of that, I work in marketing, and I feel like that's pretty much enough to get started.
Yeah, well, and I think it's really exciting that, like you said, you have a pretty strong foundation in relationships, love, and all of that, but very new to the non-monogamy sort of aspect of it in terms of practicing it. Maybe
super new. Yeah. I mean, brand spanking new. Yeah.
So we would love to hear, how did you get into it? Because obviously you've done a lot of research on relationships. So have you known about non-monogamy for a long time and just now decided to give it a whirl, or did it just become apparent to you?
Yeah.
You're like, well, I didn't know this existed. I'm going to go for it.
I totally stumbled into it unknowingly. So here's what happened. I was introduced to a dating app actually through one of the group members who's based in Barcelona. And it's a dating app called Feeld, F-E-E-L-D. And it's known for being a little bit more open to alternative sexual experiences and relationship structures. And I was kind of like not super jazzed about any of the current dating apps I was on. So I was open to giving it a try. And before I recommend anything to the group, I always want to like personally test it out myself. And so I was going to link it up in a post, but before I did so, I just wanted to feel it out. And so I set up a profile, and I actually was finding that the men I was connecting with were a lot better at communication than on other apps that I was on. So I was enjoying it. And there was a man's profile, and I wasn't necessarily drawn to his pictures. So his initial picture, like it wasn't like necessarily one that I would swipe on. But I noticed that he had listed as his interests tennis and badminton. And I was captain of my badminton team in high school. It was a huge part of like my high school experience. And it's a really like obscure random sport, right? And then tennis, obviously a lot more common, but tennis is like also a huge passion of mine. And so, I'm like, worst case scenario, maybe I'll get a new tennis partner. So I swiped. And then we immediately matched. And after we matched, I started looking through the rest of his profile. And the rest of his pictures were of a woman. So he was actually on there interested in exploring like threesomes and play.
But you hadn't read that far to know that.
If she was hooked up in badminton.
Totally hadn't read that far. I got so jazzed by the badminton. I like prematurely swiped right. And then we matched and we started chatting. And I can't remember like how the dialogue went, but I did share with him, I'm like, listen, I have to be honest, like, I'm really not interested in threesomes. I'm not sexually attracted to women, but I saw the tennis and badminton. I got excited. And so he said, well, why don't we meet up? So him and his partner and me, and like worst case scenario, it'll be a picnic on a nice sunny day. And so we did meet up, the three of us. And I wasn't even sure, like, I'm like, is this a date? There's like three of us here. How does this work? He's like, it's a date. So we just had a really nice time. We played some like lawn games. We had a picnic. We chatted. And right as we were parting ways, I got a text from him and he said, we'll call him C and we'll call his partner B. So C said, we had so much fun with you. We'd love to go out to dinner next weekend. And I really enjoyed it too. And it was funny because throughout the week, I was getting this feeling, like this, like not so good feeling in my body because I hadn't really shared with them that I was noticing. I'm like, I'm trying to think through different scenarios of how it could work with me and a woman, and was like just feeling a lot of discomfort as I envisioned possible things. And then similarly, like for me, sex is a really like intimate, sacred experience between two people. I've never really been drawn to like group sex or orgies or threesomes. And so wasn't really like feeling that dynamic either. And I remember I really love sending like video messages instead of like sending a text or even an audio message. So I sent him a video message where I just shared very candidly. I said, I've been thinking through like what's possible. And I'm just realizing I'm really heterosexual. And I wanted to just be as clear as I could with you as soon as I had that awareness before we go any further. And so, and he was just always like really appreciative of like my awareness, my self-awareness and my communication. And he said, like, it really means a lot that you're sharing this. Let's give it another go and see what happens. Him and his partner were, so backtracking, he was dating a woman when he met his current partner. So I think at the time he identified as poly and she identified as monogamous. But she was open to dating him while he was with another partner. And they maybe kind of like loosely dated for a couple months and then became more serious. So after they were serious, the man continued to date his initial partner for about 6 months. And then they broke up. And then since, say, like end of October of 2019, they've just been monogamous. So they've been together for about a year and 9 months, and about 10 months of that has been just the two of them. Around COVID, like March, they were talking about opening things up, but hadn't really gotten far because things like shut down kind of right when they were ready to dive in. So I was their very first experience with opening up, and they were mine as well. So I shared the video where I was like really, really clear. Definitely heterosexual, and I'm not interested in threesomes either. And they wanted to kind of see like what was possible. So on our second date, which was with the three of us, we ended up having a really good conversation at the end of the night where we talked about the guy, C, and I having a solo date, and his partner was really fine with that. And all throughout this time, I think he and I had very similar needs and communication styles. So the needs were around, like, he and I both love developing emotional and physical intimacy through texting, and I don't know, we're kind of like, building off of each other and co-creating together. And it was like really amazing. That's actually one of, like, when I think of my needs in a relationship, like that's such a huge part of it. It's so like meaningful for me. And so we were developing a lot of energy through, over the course of, say, like a month. We were messaging each other like all throughout the day, and it was getting pretty sexual, not necessarily like overtly sexual, but more just like talking about all of the things that we wanted to explore with each other and our fantasies and what turns us on and learning about the other's fantasies, etc. And so by the time we had our first solo date, there was a ton of like energy and sexual tension built up. And also because we're not able to kiss, it's just like taking that off the table puts kind of other things on the table because we want to connect and we want to be physical, but we can't kiss. So, anyway.
Is that a COVID because of COVID or
Yeah.
because?
Yeah,
okay.
because
I didn't know if there was another
rules. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So our solo date, we met up around 5 p.m. I think it was a Friday. And we were having sushi together outside on the patio. And then we went to a park. It was wonderful. It was like one of those like beautiful, magical nights that you just will remember forever, great energetic connection, great conversation, great chemistry. And we ended up, I won't go too explicit, but we had a sexual act in the park that was allowed when he was with the previous partner, kind of the original partner that he was seeing while he was dating B, but that hadn't been discussed related to me. And I learned after the fact, it was tough because, he and I had this really magical experience and we both felt that way. And the next morning we were texting each other and asking each other, what was your favorite moment about the date and talking about the next weekend and what we would do. And then it became clear to me that his partner was super hurt and triggered by the solo date. And she was upset about the length of time that we spent together and upset about the physical act. And she ended up asking, and I guess maybe in her mind, she just didn't think to talk through potential things that would happen. In her mind, it was just a first date. But in our minds, we had been building up a month of incredible sexting and sharing about ourselves and intimacy, Right. So I think that they didn't end up talking through potential things that could happen and therefore her boundaries. And so she ended up in being hurt and triggered. She asked for 2 weeks of no contact. And she and I are pretty different in terms of our styles. So for me, when I'm in conflict, well, just generally, but especially when I'm in conflict, communication feels like a lifeline to me. It's really important that we talk about it, that we don't wait 2 weeks, but we address it as soon as the emotions have died down, say 24 hours or 48 hours, that we talk through it, that it's collaborative, that I'm included. And basically what she was requesting is that he not contact me and they sorted out the two of them. And I felt really kind of objectified a little bit, I wasn't being treated like an equal human being with feelings, and needs, and also really shut out and just kind of suddenly dropped. And additionally, I was a threat and not a complimentary or contributing member of this dynamic.
Right.
So the 2 weeks pass and we reconnect and C says, unfortunately, B and I are not on the same page right now about non-monogamy. And it's not looking like we will be anytime soon. And so at that point, I shared, I said, sorry, that sounds really tough. I've been giving a lot of thought to my relationship vision and values, and I think we're on different ends of the spectrum. I'm really more drawn to an egalitarian form of polyamory, not necessarily equal. I get it. They're a couple, they just moved in together. They're talking about possibly having kids down the road. I don't want kids. I love living alone. So it doesn't have to be equal, but in terms of how we're treated as human beings, I need to feel equal in that sense. There's care towards my feelings and my experience.
Yeah.
So basically, I shared, I'm seeing that because of where we're at in this journey and the different levels of comfort, I'm also seeing we're on different ends of the spectrum. And I said, I'm going to hold the night that we shared and our interactions close to my heart. And I wish you both the best. And And then I heard back from him, and he asked if I would be open to like reconnecting in 6 months or a year. And I said, I would only be open to reconnecting if at that time you and your partner share my vision for relationships, which is much less like hierarchical, much less rooted in like rules. I actually really, I don't feel comfortable if there's a lot of like sharing, like reporting on the texts that we're sending, our sexting, our physical intimacy. Obviously, like disclosure is important, especially as we're talking about like sexual health. Totally fine with that. But I really value privacy and intimacy. To me, it's, again, I said it earlier, it's like this sacred thing that's shared between two people. And I think because of her discomfort with the non-monogamy, she was trying to calm herself with a lot of disclosure, which was like feeling like a violation of my privacy. So I shared, I would be open to reconnecting if at the time that you reach out, you and any partners you're involved with share my relationship vision. But, if that's not the case, and if you're not fully emotionally and physically available, I wouldn't be interested in reconnecting. And he was super, he's like, totally understand, if anything changes and you want to reach out, beforehand, there's an open door. So that's kind of how we ended things.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for walking us through that. And so just to be clear, like that's your only, so to date, like your only main polyamorous experience, correct?
Not even main, my only one.
Your only one. Your only one.
But, well, and I guess it brings up the question, is it something that now that you've started to learn about polyamory and you've probably done some research and you've done some soul searching on what you want out of a relationship, do you think that it's a model that you would be interested in, and maybe perhaps different forms where you have 2 or 3 or 5, whatever the number, partners, and they may have some other partners, or, I guess there's still maybe you are another in a triad of some sort, or a V, or whatever the dynamic. Is it something, long question short, geez. Is it something that you're interested in exploring further down the non-monogamy route?
Yeah, I'm so drawn to it. And I'll share some reasons why. I think first and foremost, what I noticed in the dynamic was that there were some things that C was experiencing with B that was very meaningful, like BDSM, which I'm really not drawn to. I'm not totally against it, but in talking through it, I don't get turned on. So I'm open to it, but it's not my jam. Other things are like so much more my jam. They want to have kids. Totally not interested in having kids. They want to share like a domestic experience. I really like living alone. I'm super emotional feelings, and I think his partner is less so. I think that's actually one of the reasons why we had such like an explosive connection, is because we both have like deep needs around emotional intimacy. And I'm not saying that there's not emotions there, but it's like they're just different styles of connecting. And I'm a very like feelings person. So what I loved and what I could see being so valuable is that we were complementary. Like it wasn't like, oh, well, I love to be submissive and I want to have kids. And we were like competing in these different areas. It was like there were so many things that she and they were into, which were totally not my thing. And there were things that I was into that weren't like her or their thing. And so that seems to make so much sense. Esther Perel has this great quote: we now go to one person what we used to go to an entire village for. And it makes so much sense that like one person isn't going to be able to meet all of our needs. And what a beautiful thing if you can use like self-awareness and communication to get your needs met through, different people. And it's funny because I actually don't get excited when I think about non-monogamy and like my journey forward. I'm a lot less excited, oh, I get to have all of these partners. What really excites me, and I kind of alluded to this initially, is I love exploring relationships and relationship dynamics and talking about them. And what I didn't even realize is it's like such a norm in non-monogamy is like everything is really talked through. You get clear on your boundaries. When feelings come up, you process them either solo or together. And all of that stuff is like so attractive to me.
Right. So I guess I had maybe a follow-up on that of, let's say, for example, and I know I'm going to start like throwing hypotheticals at you for the next hour. I don't plan to do that. But like, let's say that you found another partner and they had another partner. And so let's say this hypothetical person is dating two people and the other woman is like a clone of you. So you and this other partner aren't complementary. You are very similar.
Yeah.
Do you think there would be some type of like competition? Or do you,
Jealousy?
I guess, not necessarily competition, but do you think you'd feel differently if it wasn't like she gives them all the red M&Ms and I give them all the blue M&Ms, whatever analogy we want for the offsetting?
It's so hard to say. It's interesting. I don't think of I tend not to feel jealousy in comparison. And I'm not sure why it is. I do know that I'm very independent. I love a lot of alone time. And I've always been that way, like as far back as I can remember. And I just don't fall into comparison a lot. I have other stuff. Like my mom became bipolar when I was 13. And so we went from like incredible connection to like really volatile connection. And so for sure, like sensitivity around intense connection and it just dropping off, if that sounds reminiscent of what happened, that's like
right.
a very triggering experience for me. So I have other stuff that's like really sensitive, like we would call it like a core wound, but the jealousy and comparison less so. So I'm trying to think through, like, so let's say, so it would be my partner, like my metamor, right? Like my partner. Okay. And she was just like me and she like loved pole dancing and she like founded a relationship group that she runs. I don't know. To me, like that's awesome. Like, let's go pole dancing together. Let's like, interview each other on our groups. I don't think that that's a place that I tend to go. And we all have our stuff. And I just don't think that that's like a really sensitive spot for me.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I was just curious because you talked about like how you saw it from the aspect of we had complementary things that we were giving to this sort of middleman.
And when someone's the same or very, very similar, it can bring up
for sure.
Jealousy or like the competition.
And who knows, like maybe I would, but kind of in thinking through it, I think of more like, oh, like we'd be great friends then,
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Do you see yourself ever having multiple partners yourself?
Yeah. It's so like, who knows, it's so hard to tell. I actually had a really good conversation. So I've just started to date kind of as a solo poly persona. And I had a great conversation tonight with a guy. It was funny. He was saying that he considers himself monogamous, but his ex, they broke up because she moved across the country, was polyamorous. And so through that, he had read like Ethical Slut and dove into some other things. And I think he's open to it. I have no idea. I tend to feel deeply, and I could see how, because of the way I'm wired, I would be more drawn to having kind of like a poly vision and value set while just being with one person. But who knows? That's kind of like I just feel like this whole experience has opened up so much in terms of like connection, in terms of like my own self-awareness. So I feel like really anything's possible. And maybe I'll do like in 6 months, I'll do like a part 2 and I'll let you know.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I think it sounds like, for you, and this is something that we've talked a lot about, is like the polyamory, and it's really a mindset, and it's a set of communication. Like there's things that come along with it that are more than just you have multiple partners. Like there's so much more to it than that. And that you're really keyed in on, like, I found that the communication was better and that the consent was better and that all of these things were better because they weren't hidden. They weren't swept under the rug and assumed. You just talked about them openly.
Yeah. I really see it as almost like a philosophy where, so often in like in conventional culture, in the way that movies and TV talk about relationships, it's like the you complete me or you're mine. You know, there's this like possessiveness. And I've just never resonated with that. You know, we're independent people and we can obviously like complement each other's lives and bring like so much pleasure and, you know, deepen our experiences together. But the idea that like someone is my possession because they're my partner feels like really uncomfortable to me. And it always has.
Yeah.
I quoted Esther Perel before, but I'll quote her again. She says, our partner is always on loan with the option to renew, kind of like a library book. And that's like really how I think of it is it's like it's a choice and a commitment every day, you know, to choose the other person.
Yeah. I'm just curious too, in any of your previous relationships, did any of this ever come up or just be discussed or anything?
None.
Like nothing.
No, in fact, it's interesting because my last relationship, I wouldn't call this a relationship, obviously, but my last really meaningful relationship was with a man. We started out dating, and I don't know what his experience was. For me, there was no physical chemistry. It was actually like negative physical chemistry, if you will. And yet he has such a place in my heart. I connect with him so deeply on like a soul level. And about 3 months in, I shared, I gave it like as good a shot as I could, you know, and was very open to trying to see if we could develop the physical chemistry. Wasn't there. And so, you know, I shared that with him as delicately as I could, and also shared how meaningful our connection was to me. And I had mentioned to him, would you be open to exploring consensual non-monogamy? And that horrified him. And I think the reason why is his dad was a chronic philanderer. And so his association with his father is just like infidelity, cheating, so many women, so many partners. And I think because of that, he was not open to it, you know. But in doing a lot of reading about polyamory, it's actually super common for people to have a partner, maybe it's even a nesting partner, it's not a sexual relationship. It's because of their bond. And so if this person that I was just talking about had been, you know, open to that, like would have loved to explore that with him. Unfortunately, he wasn't. So that kind of like momentarily came up in that relationship. But other than that, no.
Yeah. So you had been like because you've studied relationships and everything, you've been aware of non-monogamy, but you maybe haven't dove into it as deeply as you have like the past few months.
Yeah. I don't know what it is. Like if it just kind of never occurred to me, or maybe I wasn't ready for it.
That's okay.
Yeah. Well, what are some of the things maybe that you are really excited to explore with it? And on the flip side, like maybe some of the things that you're a little concerned about, like you've gotten a little bit of a taste of like how it can maybe not go the way you hoped, but are there other things that you're worried about or that have come up now that you're like, oh, now I got to watch out for this and that?
Yeah. So it's interesting. I was listening to a Polyamory podcast episode on, this is so dorky. This just shows how much I nerd out on this stuff. It was on cognitive biases in relationships. And they talked about this phenomenon called reactance, which is the tendency when we have our personal freedom in some way diminished. Let's say it's through like a rule or through another person. Subconsciously, so we're probably not aware of it, we're going to push back against the rule as a way to regain our personal freedom. And even if it's something that we don't have a big desire to do, we're going to do everything in our power to do that thing. And again, it's often not on a conscious level. And so what's interesting is, you know, I've been doing a ton of reading and listening and learning about rules versus boundaries versus agreements and how to structure relationships. And what I was noticing is in my dynamic with this guy and this couple, every time we would talk about a sexual act that we wanted to do together, he would say, I just need to run this by B. And I remember every time he said that, it was like I had a really negative reaction. It almost felt like a parental experience where I was, a teenager and I have to check with mom before I get to, drive to my friend's house, but it was about my own body and my own pleasure. And so one of the things I'll definitely be keeping an eye out for is, the idea of rules that are imposed to control another person's behavior versus sharing boundaries that put limits on my own. So my sense is people who are newer to non-monogamy are going to veer towards rules because the sense is you want to protect the existing couple. And one way, there's like this illusion of protection with rules, although we know that, anytime you're involving people in feelings and sexuality, rules pretty much go out the window pretty fast. And so, yeah, I'll definitely be looking for people who are clear on their boundaries and are less so looking to impose rules on a new partner, say like a third, and rather are able to articulate, here's what's okay with me, here's what I'm comfortable with, here's what's not, here's what I do personally when this boundary is violated. So, for example, an easy example would be like around sexual health. I'm not comfortable with my partner being fluid bonded with anyone besides me. And if I learn that happens, then I will use protection with him. Something like that, where it's the locus of control is within you.
Right. Well, I was on that sort of along that same vein. If in this situation that you were in, if he had come to you and said, here are, my partner and I have talked about the things that we're both comfortable doing, and she would prefer I not have, vaginal intercourse with another woman, whether or not it was protected or unprotected. So we're allowed to do everything up to that point. Would that still for you be a sort of a warning sign, right? Because he's coming to you ahead of time and saying, these are our limits, these are our boundaries. It's not, hey, I'd love to do this. Okay, let me go check. Yep, she says I can do that. Hey, I'd like to do this thing. Let me go check. I can do that too. It was coming to you ahead of time. Would that be a different outcome for you?
I have so many thoughts about this. So the first is, I feel strongly that I need to be included in conversations. So, of course, the couple can discuss solo what's comfortable, what's coming up for them. But at some point, it needs to stop being like this middleman situation. Mm-hmm. So let's say hypothetically, all three of us sat down together and B shared, I'm not comfortable with vaginal intercourse. I would want to know, what do you make it mean? Like, why that rule? What's the reasoning behind it? What do you make it mean when C has vaginal intercourse with someone else? I really want to get to beneath the surface of the rule. If it's like, I'm afraid, he won't want to have sex with me, I feel like that's like really a bigger issue that needs to be addressed before anything else happens, right? Because anytime there's that much fear, then that's the dynamic that I'm playing in. And to me, like, love is, it's expansion, it's boundless. I don't want to be constantly like entering into this fear dynamic where it's like, I'm this threat. And if vaginal intercourse happens, then, the relationship is at risk or like threatened, Right. And then the third piece is, to me, it's not like I love touch, and there's so many different types of touch that like send me to the moon. Even like non-sexual touch, like just having my leg rubbed, I love. But to me, it's more that it makes me super uncomfortable to have a non-participant in the sexual dynamic or in the relationship, like set rules for it. And I know that like it's really common. It just makes me uncomfortable. And it's at that point, it's not even about vaginal intercourse, because there's so many other things that are enjoyable to me. But it's about the fact that like rules are being imposed on my body and my pleasure. It's just so foreign to me. It's not something I would ever want to do to someone else. It feels really dehumanizing. And yeah, I don't know if I would want to enter into a dynamic where there was so much fear or there was that power dynamic. Yeah, that's kind of my thought. What are your thoughts?
No, I don't. I was just kind of really curious on that, because one could even, draw the parallel and say, well, that's no different than you saying you don't want your partner to have unprotected sex with one of his other partners, right? It's the same. It's imposing a rule, and it's for your safety in that aspect. But the other woman could be saying, well, vaginal intercourse, makes me feel the same way that
I see.
Unprotected sex makes you feel.
I mean, if she said, let's say she had like an immunodeficiency and was very at risk, if it was like related to like a really valid health thing, for sure. If it's related to like, he might like it with her more and not want to have sex with me, that's not okay. Because again, that's like the energetic fear dynamic that I don't want to be a part of,
Right. Yeah, no, that's fair. And I was just kind of curious, and this isn't like, well, what about this? What about this? What about this? I don't want it to seem like I'm like interrogating you. I was just curious because, I think these are things that a lot of people come up against.
Yeah.
And then you start having to ask yourself, like, what about this situation? What about that situation?
And really determine what you're comfortable with.
Yeah. And a lot of times you don't even think about that situation until you're in it. And then you're like, oh shit, I didn't ever think I'd be here, sitting at a table with two people where he's having to ask her if he can do this thing with me. Like that's probably not something you imagined would ever happen, 6 months ago.
Yeah. It's so weird. It feels so weird to me. And I would even say like, again, it's not about the sex. I think it's really two things for me. It's the fear and it's the someone telling someone else what they can do or can't do with their body.
Right.
It would be the same thing if let's say one of the rules was you're not allowed to like touch her leg during dinner. Like it'd be the same thing. It makes me super uncomfortable just from an autonomy, like from my freedom, my sovereignty, which is like such a huge part of the human experience, feels super uncomfortable to me.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. Well, and on the flip side, what are some of the things that you're like, now that you've dipped your toes in and you've done a whole bunch of research on it, what are some of the things that you're really excited to explore about it?
Really excited to explore just like talking through what comes up for people. Yeah, I love that. I love talking about
sounds like more of the conversation, like a lot, just diving deep into some of the new conversations.
Yeah. What's coming up for you? What are you nervous about? What are you excited about? How did that feel for you? Yeah. I think that's the main thing.
Right. Yeah. I was just going to jump back to the other couple and almost give them a little bit of credit on the sense that, it sounded like he communicated very well with you, right? So one of the things, maybe backing up even further, that I've talked about, or that we've talked a lot about, is the term unicorn hunting.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of people who absolutely hate it. They say it's the worst thing in the world and it's unethical and all. And we've always kind of come at it from a perspective of like, if everybody in the relationship has their sovereignty to do what they want to do, and they're informed and they know what's going on, to us, there's not a huge issue, right? And in this case, this was a very clear cut, like they were they were looking for a woman to have threesomes with. And then they said, well, maybe we can fit her into our box anyways. And then when it was clear you weren't getting into their box, it was like, well, maybe we can try to fit into her box. And then that clearly didn't work, right? But I think throughout the whole thing, he communicated very clearly and came back at the end and said like, hey, you have to do what's good for you. I'm going to do what's good for us. And like, we're just not a fit right now. So there was no manipulation. There was no trickery. It was like, we're going to try it. Didn't work. And it wasn't going to work for you, and you guys just had to like go your separate ways, which,
well, and I think it sounds like the real, when they kind of put the limitation of like no communication for 2 weeks, that was kind of like the trigger for you of like, oh, well, maybe this isn't really what I thought it was.
Yeah. It did feel a little bit like there's, I don't want to say an incompatibility, but there's a divide around relationship structure philosophy. And it did feel a little bit like I was trying to be inserted into a very, very specific, narrow hole to try to like alleviate some of the discord around that, or kind of like lessen the different poles there. And I think what for me was upsetting is it did feel like there were, and I think they're really great people with really the best of intentions. And I don't think at any moment during any of this was there any type of like deception or manipulation.
Right.
I think all of this was coming from like a very heartfelt place. I did feel a little bit, I don't want to say objectified, but not treated like an equal human being when things got tough and they went into like protect the established couple mode. I felt kind of like dropped, and like there was not a lot of care or consideration towards my experience because there was just clearly like so much triggering around the couple dynamic. What's going on? This is all happening so fast, right?
Right.
And so that did not feel good.
Right.
And when I reached out to see, like in our last text exchange, I said, it's really important to me to be with someone who can remain emotionally available to me in a consensual non-monogamy dynamic while also being a container for his partner if she's hurt or triggered. And it's also super important that I'm with someone who can create his own boundaries that are separate from his partner's, in a moment where there's like triggering and hurt. Because that's one of the things I noticed is like I don't think he needed 2 weeks, but I think because his partner was triggered, he took on her boundary. And I don't know if that was like her telling him like, you absolutely cannot talk to this person, or if it was him seeing her being hurt and saying, okay, she doesn't want me to contact Leia, so I'm not going to, and him not like having his own voice. I know they're seeing a poly couples therapist. I don't know if like the couples therapist said, you absolutely cannot talk to this woman for 2 weeks, but whatever it was, it felt really shitty. And this person who was like super emotionally available to me suddenly became not just like emotionally unavailable, but physically unavailable. Right. And to me, that's just a deal breaker.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I think, and I would say that the vast majority of, well, again, to use this derogatory term, the unicorn hunters out there, there probably very few of them have malicious intent. I would say a very, very, very small percent, right? But I think a lot of times we're going to try this thing, and this thing is we want to try a threesome with another woman. And then feelings happen, people get scared, people get worried about like you said, their established relationship dynamic. And I guess you've been quoting Esther Perel. I'll go the other direction with Mike Tyson and say, right, everyone's got a plan until they get punched in the face, right? And if they're like, well, we're going to do the threesome with this hot chick and she's going to come over, and then when we're done with her, she's going to go home and she's going to leave us alone, and our relationship's going to be just fine. And then it doesn't go that way, and you don't know what to do, right? And oftentimes the end result is, well, we're going to shut this third person out to save what we've already established. And I mean, for you, good on you, right? That you were strong enough, right? Because I'm sure there's many women who are like, well, I guess that's, what I am. I'm just their third, and they'll call me when they're ready. And for you were like, hey,
this isn't working.
That's not going to work for me.
Yeah.
And then good on them to be like, hey, then you do it wasn't like, no, we're going to be fine. We're just, hold on a little bit longer. We'll get you back in there. Like they didn't do any of that. So I think it's all in all, like a really good learning experience for you. Honestly, probably a really good learning experience for them. Yeah. And one other thing I was curious, if he had come to you and said, hey, I really like you, I want to continue exploring this, but like this didn't go how we had planned on. Mm-hmm. And I want to continue exploring this, but I need to take a step back so her and I can work through some things so we can come back at this the right way. Would that have felt better than she says, I can't talk to you for 2 weeks, we'll see you in 2 weeks?
Okay, so you're saying rather than the 2-week pause, if he had said, B is really triggered and hurt, and we need a couple sessions with our couples therapist to deal with this. Would you be open to taking a pause? Yeah, that would have felt very different to me. I think I also, just because of what I know about relationships, it just is so clear to me that this is not a welcoming, energetic dynamic for me to be entering into, right? There's a lot of like fear, and I'm not saying it's invalid. I'm just saying what I'm sensing is it's just, they're not ready for someone else to enter into their dynamic right now. There's so much they need to get clear on and they need to work through before it would be a safe space.
Right.
So as much as, I told C, I'm like, I don't feel this connection often. I'm like, this is maybe like a once or twice in a decade type feeling that I'm having. And yet still, it's like an absolute no-brainer to me, it's not a safe space to enter into.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
That's tough. That's a tough call to make.
Yeah, and I think the reason I was kind of asking that is because I would venture to guess that in the future, right, for anybody exploring non-monogamy, like you may enter into a relationship with somebody who's already in a relationship, and that may be something that comes up where they're like, hey, like I really want to keep exploring this with you, but I need to pull back to sort out some things in this other relationship. And in a way to do that without making you feel less than the other partner, but also like they at the same time, that other relationship is still very important to them and they don't want to lose that one.
Yeah.
And that's a really hard place to be.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I don't want to lose you. I don't want to lose them.
Yeah.
I need to get my own shit straight. And I understand if you're not going to be there on the flip side, but like, I can't pretend. And maybe it's delivery.
I feel like that's kind of what he did or was trying to do. I think, he was trying to create that space for reentry. And I shared that I saw us having like pretty different relationship visions.
Yeah.
And that's when he said, would you be open to, he said to me, would you be open to reconnecting in 6 months or a year? And I know myself. And if I have strong romantic and sexual feelings for someone, I can't go from that to be friends. That's like a very inauthentic elephant in the room type experience for me. And so that's when I said, like, if you're open emotionally and physically for connection, definitely open to reconnecting. If it's just because we had a beautiful connection and you want to stay in touch with me, but you're still with this partner and she's not open to non-monogamy, no, that's not a fit.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
Well, thank you so much for sharing so much of that relationship too. I think that it was only like your only non-monogamous experience, I think it was super powerful and had a lot of twists and turns that I think, we touched on a lot of really important pieces of it. So thank you.
Yeah. Thanks to both of you.
Yeah. Well, was there, any other thoughts that you had on, as you start to go back out there and look for other people? First of all, do you think you'll continue using Field? And if you do, like, have you tweaked your profile to maybe put the right bait out there for the next?
Or have you tried any other dating apps or websites? Sources.
So I definitely updated my Field profile. So I'm identifying as solo poly. I would say there's not massive familiarity on Field. there is like greater self-awareness than other dating apps, but I still think that a lot of people, when they're on dating apps, don't even read the profile. It's pictures for the most part. So even if you do have someone who reads the profile, 50% chance they'll know what solo poly is. That's fine. And then I've joined a couple discussion groups on Facebook about polyamory that have been great. And what I learned, to my surprise, is that OkCupid is actually like kind of like really the front runner in terms of non-monogamous dating. And they even have like specificity around monogamous or non-monogamous. And I haven't been on OkCupid probably for like 20 years. But I did restart a profile, and, the gentleman that I mentioned earlier was someone who I met on OkCupid, and, making connections, and there's a lot of responsiveness, which is nice. So yeah. And in terms of like lessons learned, I'm really early on asking people, what draws you to non-monogamy? How do you structure your relationship? Questions like that will give me a sense. And people are like really detailed and really self-aware, and that's been great. So just like what I've noticed is in monogamous dating, kind of getting to those questions would really, I don't know, maybe turn people off or be like kind of outside the norm. Whereas in non-monogamous dating, it's like totally the norm. So that's really refreshing.
Right.
And then, being able to ask about like veto power, and is it a hierarchy-based relationship? And is it a primary partner? Is there like, what agreements do you have? Is it ongoing permission? Just kind of getting clarity on what dynamic I'm stepping into. And it's interesting because I've been really listening to a lot of podcasts, and what I've heard is like a lot of people stay away from couples that are in their first 2 years of opening up, because there is a lot of like opening and then closing and then sorting through feelings and then reopening and then something else happens. So that was really interesting to hear too, and just like something to consider as well.
Right. Is dating somebody in a monogamous sense something that you're still open to, or have you jumped off the monogamy train and you're full on non-monogamous or bust from here on out?
To me, it's more of a philosophy. So for example, the guy that I was chatting with earlier today, who said he identifies as monogamous, but he's red ethical slut, and he's had partners who've been open to it, and some elements really resonate with him. Great. Right. I don't need them to like have 10 partners, but it's right. More of a philosophy that like your partner isn't yours, it's a choice. It's a conscious choice that you make every day in choosing them. Like things like that really resonate. And, I shared with him tonight, like not looking to have kids, like really like living alone, like not totally against marriage, but also like don't dream of, having a wedding every day. So I'm finding myself like being like really just forward about that earlier on. And I think it will either resonate with people or it won't. And if it doesn't resonate, great. And if it does, great.
Yeah. No, I love that.
Yeah. No, I do too.
Is there anything that we haven't talked about that you wanted to talk about? And we also wanted to give you the opportunity to maybe talk about your Facebook group a little bit and the community that you've created, and maybe how people can find it, join it, be a part of it, even though it's not necessarily non-monogamy specific. Again, we're not like shut down to anything that's not non-monogamy here.
Yeah,
so
totally.
Just if it's a resource that helps people, we'd love to put it out there.
Great. For me, one of the big lessons learned is I feel so self-honoring in how I handled this situation. I think that for quite a while, I've had strong self-awareness and good boundaries. I think where I haven't showed up for myself as well as I would like is when I have felt really strong connection, which I'm just someone, I don't feel that super often. And when I'm with someone who's like deeply meeting my strongest needs that tend not to be met, which are like emotional intimacy, physical intimacy, like really great communication, it's been hard for me to like as soon as I see that it's not going to work, that I share a boundary and they're not able to honor it or whatever it might be, that I've ended it immediately or exited the dynamic, or however you want to say it. And I did that in this situation. And there's, as painful as it can be to feel the sense of loss of someone who, was really just like exploding your world in so many good ways, there's no better feeling than like honoring yourself and your needs and not self-abandoning to save a connection that's really meaningful for you. And so I would say to anyone who's going through a similar situation, whether it's polyamorous or monogamous or early stages of dating, that there's just so much value in being aware of your needs and being able to show up for them. So that's a huge lesson and a really beautiful moment that came out of all of this.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah. And doing that, I mean, that's easy to do, right? If like the connection isn't there or whatever. But if you're like, if everything's off the charts, except for this piece, then you're like, fuck, hard. I don't want to do this, but I'm going to have to do this.
Yeah. And it's been cool because I've been sharing the story in this group that I started on Facebook, and it's been so fast. It's a very engaged, curious, open, vulnerable community. And I've been getting so many DMs from people who are trying to show up for themselves and have boundaries and struggling and asking for my advice and like asking me to like craft a script for them to communicate a boundary with a partner, which is all stuff I love. Like I dork out on that. But it's amazing. Like there's so much power in sharing your story, and from a place of both like vulnerability and self-awareness and self-honoring. And so I would also encourage anyone, if you've had an experience, like find a safe platform to share it and use your story to be like of service or to inform or inspire others.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, for sure. And I think too, the other big piece that comes out of that is people saying, yeah, me too. Yeah, I've had this. And you realize that you're not alone and that you're not crazy, right?
Yeah.
Like those are really powerful things to learn about yourself in a very hard situation.
Yeah. And my question, I'm curious, what drew you to start that?
Oh, the group?
Yeah.
I have to share two other insights that have been really interesting. So
okay, you can do that first. Yeah.
Okay. In me sharing my story within the group, number one, there have been some people who are in B's situation. So they are in a couple that's trying to open up, and the woman is getting really triggered, or let's say the guy's getting triggered too. And so they've shared how impactful it is to hear my side or my experience. And I've really appreciated, because I have a lot of like, not close relationships, but I know and care about these people. So when someone I know and care about shares this experience, it allows me to be more empathetic, which I really appreciate. And it's also really interesting because it's really only in the last month that I've been like exploring and talking about polyamory. But, I just booked a Facebook Live with, her name is Ellie Sheff, Dr. Ellie Sheff. She wrote Stories from the Polycule, and she has a couple other books as well. So we just booked a Facebook Live in the group with her, and I'm sharing about polyamory and resources. And it's insane how many people have come out of the woodwork talking about it, whether they're in dynamics or interested about them. And so I was laughing so much because in my conversation with Esther Perel, which was about a month ago, I asked her a question about this dynamic. And then I shared the interview with my dad. And my dad, my dad's in his 70s. He's actually a psychologist, but he's like really old school and much more private than me. And he said, Leia, I'd be careful about sharing this private personal information about you on the internet. And I was like kind of offended because he's basically telling me to like hide my identity. And my sister's gay, and, she came out when in her early 30s, and he was like pretty good about that. I think he has some beliefs about polyamory, some like negative beliefs. So it was just interesting to hear. So there's just been like this beautiful ripple effect of like vulnerability and sharing and curiosity. The group is called the Esther Perel Discussion Group on Facebook. We talk about infidelity. We talk about eroticism, desire, relationships, dating, masculinity. So it's very safe. There's no shaming. There's no judgment allowed. We have a zero tolerance policy around that. And it's about 12,000 members from across the world. We often do Facebook Lives. We have a free women's group that we do weekly Zoom calls on Saturday about relationship topics, which has been magnificent. And yeah, you're welcome to join us on Facebook. I also have a show called Song Therapy, where we unpack the relationship dysfunction in popular songs. So I think I provided a link to check out some of those episodes as well. And if you're going through something similar, you're always welcome to DM me on Facebook. I'm still a newbie to this, but I've started to create like a whole compilation of resources, some of my favorite podcast episodes, blogs. Yeah, just like quick, easy reference points around common things that come up.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And how long have you been doing the group?
Oh, you asked me how I started the group. So I founded the group in September of 2017. So it'll be about 3 years. And I had just gotten ghosted. And this was a guy who I felt crazy chemistry with. This was like 3 years ago. Oh my goodness. It was really amazing. And we only dated for 2 months and he ghosted. And right after that experience, I was at an event called Summit of Greatness that's put on by a podcaster, Lewis Howes, who has a podcast called School of Greatness. And every year, he brings about 10 incredible speakers to his hometown of Columbus, Ohio, for a summit where we're doing like high intensity workouts and there are like parties with amazing DJs at night. And then we're learning during the day. So all things I love. And the very first year I went, Esther Perel she was the speaker that stood out to me. And she had this closing line in her talk. She said, in dating and relationships, we're often picked for a role that we didn't audition for. And I didn't know this at the time with this guy, but he was just out of a long-term relationship when he met me. So it was like the type of thing, like he had a really nasty breakup. And then that night he joined a dating app. And I was like really ready for like a really meaningful connection. And so I picked him. I thought he was a nice Jewish boy who was really funny and smart. And he picked me because he thought, I was like going to be like the rebound. And I remember thinking like how profound that was and so true. And just wanting to talk about it with people. And I have like wonderful, smart, intellectual friends, but I think talking about relationships is just like kind of an acquired interest. And so that day I founded the group, not thinking anything about it. And, it's all been organic growth. Like we don't do advertising or anything. Esther is her own best like marketer, really. And it's just grown organically. And there's just so much engagement and so much great advice. People are really into learning in the group. So it's not just like dump him, when someone posts like a really vulnerable, raw question. It's like really, really thoughtful advice grounded in the best books and learning and experiences. And, a lot of people join either because they just experienced an affair or in the aftermath of an affair, or maybe they're like involved in an affair. So it's a delicate dynamic in that we have people who've been the betrayed in an affair. We have like the betrayers, we have the other person, and they're all vulnerably sharing, and we keep it very safe for everyone involved. So it's a great, safe, open space to talk about relationship dynamics.
Awesome.
Yeah. No, it's fantastic.
Yeah. And thank you so much for doing all that work and for putting that out there, because it is very important. And obviously people have found you, and that's amazing. So, and found each other in that group.
Yeah.
Right. And before we go, I just wanted to again say thank you, but also I wanted to circle back in case there were some unicorn hunters listening, thinking that like that searching for a woman that will come in and then leave when they want, like, that's still I honestly think that that's a valid thing if it is communicated to the person, because I know we have heard from women who, like, they want to be that person. They don't want the deep connection. They want to show up, have some hot sex with another couple, and then they want to disappear and don't want to be bothered until the next time they want it. Right. And so there's a match for everybody, but it's about communicating it on the front end and making sure everyone has the autonomy to get what they want out of that situation. Yeah. So, yeah, 100%. I just wanted to throw that out there in case somebody was listening was like, fuck you, Finn. So you can still think that, but I'm just saying that it's valid. It's just, you've got to communicate it, and you've got to be willing when the person says not for me to let them go. Yeah. Let them find what they want and not try to keep them on the hook because whatever you want to get out of them.
Yeah. Well, do you have any final thoughts before we say goodbye?
No, just again, wanted to reiterate, it was just so great. When I experienced the request for the 2-week pause, it was just really kind of jarring, to go from a night of like such incredible connection and intimacy to like silence, in a moment of conflict, and just so appreciated you both taking the time to share your experiences and your perspective with me. I just really appreciated it. And it was very helpful in terms of me kind of processing what happened and getting to the place that I'm at now. So thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, absolutely. So, well, thank you again for coming on, for doing all the work you're doing, for creating the groups you've created and the spaces you've created, and helping the people you've helped. So thank you.
And links to everything will be in the show notes as always.
Yeah.
Great.
And have a wonderful evening, and we'll be in touch.
Sounds good. Thanks, Emma. Thanks, Finn.